the home educated are outside of the control of statists and power mongers and people who love control. They just need to be able to trust parents, generally speaking. Are there people who do a bad job once in a while? Yes. But look at the public schools. How many kids there are failing, or even by their own standards, not proficient?
Welcome, everybody, to Conversations That Matter for the New American Magazine. Thank you so much for joining us. I am your host, Alex Newman. Our guest today, he is, I think, the world leader when it comes to understanding the data, the research, what the studies show about homeschooling. And he approaches this as a scholar. Even though he's got his own opinions about things, he's got his own religious views, he approaches this issue of the research from an objective, scholarly, academic point of view. And that comes out very clearly in his research. He's the president of the National Home Education Research Institute. You can find him online at NHERI.org. He's known around the world for his research on homeschooling. He's done numerous peer-reviewed studies, books, chapters in books over almost 40 years of this. He's testified as an expert witness in courts, in legislatures. He's served as a professor at the undergraduate and graduate levels. He's got a PhD in science education from Oregon State University. Dr. Brian Ray, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for joining us. So let's start with a really, I think, obvious question, the gorilla in the room. Does homeschooling work? Is it a good thing from the perspective of producing children who are well-educated, socialized in the sense that, is commonly understood, socialization? And do they do okay as adults? What does the research show?
Yeah, it's great. People have been asking that now for the 40 years of the modern homeschool movement, Alex. And I like how you say I'm a researcher, but let's face it, everybody has something that drives what they do. I do try to be honest with numbers, okay? That's what we try to do. And so one time I thought, you know what, I'm just going to do a review of research on studies that made it into peer-reviewed journals, just for fun. Let's just narrow it down because, there's a lot of research now. But when I took just those studies and I updated that review just a couple months ago when I was headed down to Florida for a conference on school choice with a capital S and C that we might talk about later, I summarize these, and 63% of peer-reviewed studies that deal with academic achievement show that the home educated are doing statistically significantly better than those in conventional schools. So we don't even really have a level playing field anymore. We have a playing field where it says, hey, you know what? It's a little higher there for the home educated. And maybe we'll have time to get into why. So I'm just going to give you the stats for a minute. And let's go back about why. Then secondly, this is a question that homeschool families and anybody who thought maybe parent-directed home-based education was okay after it was okay for thousands of years before we had institutional schools take over by 1900. What about socialization? And as I look at that question, Alex, I think, did anybody ask Abraham Lincoln's mom, what about socialization? We're worried about Abe, or what about socialization for Thomas Edison's mom, or, for him, or, any of the other millions of people who were scientists, candlestick makers, blacksmiths, businessmen, businesswomen, moms, dads. Nobody worried about that, up until 1900. But anyway, here we go. So 64% of peer-reviewed studies have found that the home educated do statistically significantly better than those in institutional schools in terms of social and emotional development, measured in all kinds of ways. Okay, then the third thing that I looked at was, all right, so, hey, maybe they're doing okay or well academically. Maybe they're doing okay or well socially and emotionally. But what about now that they're in adulthood? So I looked for all those studies, peer-reviewed studies, and 50% of those studies found that the home educated are doing statistically significantly better than those who went to institutional schools. Now, people might say, well, what about the other 50%? Well, it mostly is like mixed or no difference. That's on almost all of these. There's no trend the other way. The trend in these studies is that the home educated are doing at least as well and actually notably better than those who go to institutional public and private schools. That's just what we know. And by the way, some people say, I've had all kinds of scholars attack my work and criticize my work, and which is fun. That's what scholars do. We criticize each other and we look for the perfect study. But these studies are by many people. These are not just studies by Brian Ray. Just a little context there.
Yeah. And, that's not surprising to me, somebody who's been in homeschool world for a while. I homeschool my 5 children. Obviously, I am biased in favor of home education. I think it's phenomenal. It's amazing. But when you interact with homeschool families, you realize their children are, on average, super well educated. They're very social. They can deal with people of all ages. And as you just confirmed, the scientific, the peer-reviewed literature shows overwhelmingly that homeschoolers do better across the spectrum on all these different areas. And yet, Brian, we have growing hostility in certain quarters to homeschooling. We've got people like Harvard's Elizabeth Bartholet from the Harvard Law School, the Child Advocacy Project, saying we need a presumptive ban on homeschooling. We've got the National Education Association voting regularly that homeschooling cannot provide what children really need. So you've got these forces that are now coming out. In Europe, we're seeing more and more governments actually ban homeschooling, or at least put it under really serious restriction. Why do you think homeschooling is why do homeschoolers do better? And in light of all that, why in the world would all these different forces want to ban or undermine homeschooling?
Yeah, those are great. Yeah. So I think, look at it this way. I try to throw out the H word. Let's not even use the word homeschooling, but I can ask professional educators, government certified teachers, professors of education. I hang out with those people. Ask any parent, ask any young person a series of questions. When do children usually learn more and do better academically? When they're being taught in a group of 28 peers or with 2 or 3 or 4 kids? We all know the answer. When do they do better? When they're being bullied or not bullied? We all know the answer. When do they do better? When they can spend more academic engaged time or less? We all know the answer. When do they do better? If the curriculum and the pedagogical approach are customized to their particular strengths and weaknesses and needs and desires and dreams, or when it's just a one shot fits all for everybody in a group? We all know the answer. So why would the home educated not do better, Alex? That's the real question. Why would they not do better? And I think everybody knows that, but somehow it bothers the sensibility or the pride or the ego of the professionally trained teacher. And somehow it bothers culture because now for 120 years, the majority of people have been in institutional schools. And so they feel a little bit nervous that somebody could do better than they did. But when they think about it, I go, oh, we could do better. I think another thing is people love control. The home educated are outside of the control of statists and power mongers and people who love control. They just need to be able to trust parents, generally speaking. Are there people who do a bad job once in a while? Yes. But look at the public schools. How many kids there are failing or even by their own standards, not proficient? People should not be worried about homeschoolers as a group at all. They should be encouraging it because they're doing so well.
Yeah. And I've looked at the government's data on the children in public schools, and the 2019 National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP, the nation's report card, showed that less than 1/3 of 8th graders were proficient in any core subject. So, when they fix the government schools, maybe they can come talk to homeschoolers. Until then, I think the difference is very clear. Brian, before we go to break, just a real quick question. You've been following this for decades. Just over the last few years, we've seen a huge influx into homeschooling during COVID. The U.S. Census Bureau, and you probably have better data than they do, but they found that there was almost a doubling of the homeschooling population. And they said that's legitimate homeschoolers, not people doing government school at home. I would guess that some of those have probably gone back into the system. But what are some of the trends, the direction this is going? What are some of the changes you've seen just in recent years and recent decades?
Well, the main trends are this. One, ever since the late 1970s, homeschooling numbers have grown in terms of absolute numbers and in percent of the school-age population. 2 school years ago, it jumped way up, right? Okay. And then 1 school year ago, before this one, it dropped back down. However, think of the graph. They can go to my website. It's still going up. So even though it bumped way up, it came back down. When it came back down, it was still higher than 2 years before that. So the numbers are increasing. I think the trends are that, we know from research, and I know from experience, that when people are homeschooled, they're more likely to homeschool their children. So in other words, we have more and more graduates who now become parents who will homeschool their children. We also have that the fundamental reasons for homeschooling haven't changed much, Alex, over the last 35 years. People want strong family relationships. They want strong academic education. They want the parents to be able to teach the values instead of the government teach the values and indoctrinate the kids. We see also more in terms of a wider variety. There's always been a variety in homeschooling. People got to get this. There's always been a big variety in homeschooling, all the way from whatever stereotypes you want, right wing Bible thumpers, left wing, grow up, blow up your TV, move to the country, non-Christians. There's always been the variety, but the variety is more obvious now in terms of especially ethnic background and those kinds of things. So we're seeing a huge diversity in homeschooling. And I think that's good for the growth. I think that what we see in research and my personal philosophy, parent-directed, home-based education is good for children. So we're seeing more and more of it. I think it's going to continue growing. However, there are some factors that stop the growth or slow the growth. And I think one of those could be handing tax dollars to the private homeschool movement, which we might talk about later. But only so many people want to spend that much time with their children. It's a lot of work. It's well worth it. But I think as it grows, people are going to see more and more the advantages of parent-directed, home-based education.
Yeah, well, let's go to break real quick, and when we get back, let's delve into school choice just for a few minutes. Folks, stay tuned. We're going to be right back here with Dr. Brian Ray.
All right, parents, listen up. We've all seen the countless examples of how radical leftists have been destroying American schools. It's no longer just about the terrible math and reading levels. Now, radical left teachers birthed from liberal universities are forcing gender indoctrination in kindergarten. They're teaching lessons on white guilt.
Freedom Project Academy has perfected live online learning over the course of a decade. I get a ton of great feedback about this program, a ton.
They're built on Judeo-Christian values, a classical curriculum. What does that mean? It means they're taught, your children are taught the way that the founding generations of the country. My own son Noah did Freedom Project Academy for several years when he was younger.
The more we tell our friends about these things, the more people will get on board, and I believe that we can be the catalyst to some real change.
We must save the West. Our way of life and our culture is under attack, and because of patriots like you and your project, I have optimism for the future.
Welcome back to Conversations That Matter. I'm your host, Alex Newman. Our guest today is still Dr. Brian Ray. We're talking about homeschooling. Dr. Ray, I just did a big article in the New American, which of course sponsors this podcast, about the dangers of so-called school choice. I, for one, am very concerned about this move to make more tax dollars available to so-called homeschoolers. I think you share some of those concerns. Talk to us about why you think it may be dangerous to open up the flood of public money for homeschooling.
Yeah. Alex, I think your article is great. I know that a lot of people push me to say, Brian, you got to talk about the practical things first, but I'm not going to. I believe in starting first with philosophy, with values, with presuppositions. So I'm going to kind of do your article backwards. And that is this, the education of children, the values, the heart, the holistic education. That is the duty and the responsibility of parents with the help of volitionally, freely chosen other people. It could be organizations, it could be a church, it could be others. I believe that both from a Christian perspective, and I also believe that from what I might call a classical liberal, freedom-loving perspective, that you do not want the civil government, the state, being in charge of the hearts and minds of the next generation. It makes no sense. It's not a free nation when you do that. So I believe that the education should be privately run, and that is homeschooling is a form of private education, as are Roman Catholic schools, Lutheran schools, New Age pagan schools, Jewish schools, Muslim schools, whatever you want to call it. Now, here's the practical effect. If you take a tax dollar, if you take money that is property that's forced out of one neighbor to give welfare in education to another neighbor, there must be government control. And a lot of people use the term accountability or regulation. And I like to use the real term, control. It's strong. I like that, because all of us should say, hey, if the Army is putting out a bid to get hammers for the Army, and we could get hammers for $19 each, but there's some kind of fraud or corruption going on or whatever, and the Army pays $98 for a hammer, all of us get upset. We don't want that. We want there to be control over our tax dollars. We all work hard for that. So we want the government control. So here's what I say. If all of the self-professed conservatives, classical liberals, Christians who say they believe in the free market, who say they do not like socialism and statism, they should say, if we take a tax dollar for our private school, our homeschool, our whatever it is, it's private, I want the government to control me and my education of my children. That's what they should be saying. I'm trying to put it as clearly and simply as possible. And here's the deal. If you take tax dollars, you should be controlled. And why do you want to be controlled? If you have the beauty and the freedom of private Jewish schools, private Muslim schools, private New Age schools, private Christian schools. Why do you want government control if you have the beauty of the homeschool freedom space? You should not want that. And I want to encourage parents. I've been studying and following homeschoolers for over 35 years, and I've met thousands of homeschool families. I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you can do a very good home-based education of your children on a low income. I know that. I've met families with 3 children, 10 children, 15 children, and they've done it. You can do it. You do not have to have the tax dollars from your neighbor that's forced out of them by the government handed to you. And there's much more freedom when you do not have government control. So I know that factually, and I know that experientially. I know it from research.
Yep. And it's true in our own family. I mean, we've been homeschooling the entire childhood of my children, and we are certainly not wealthy. In fact, according to the federal government's definition, we're poor, which strikes me as kind of silly, but somehow we can do it. And so, praise the Lord, where there's a will, there's a way. If God commanded it, you most definitely can find a way to do it. Dr. Ray, what's the best way for people to follow your work? I know you've got your website, NHERI.org. Do you have any social media? Is there any place where people can follow developments? Can they get a mailing list?
People are pushing me toward that, Alex, but the simplest thing right now is go to our website, top right corner, something like Get Connected, and we do have a free homeschool research email, not a bunch of junk mail. Just go on our website, NHERI.org. And you know what? Maybe in the next month or two, I'm going to start doing a little more video and social media.
I hope you will, Dr. Ray, because this information that you have is critical. It's priceless. It is absolutely essential to get out there to the public. So we appreciate you so much. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Conversations That Matter. Hopefully we'll catch up with you again very soon.
Yes.
All right, folks, I'm Alex Newman. This is Conversations That Matter. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, God bless you all.